God has been showing that right now there's an incredibly ripe field of men and women who need to be discipled. Next time you're at church, and you know someone there, or you ask them, who are you explicitly and intentionally discipling? I want to be in a church where I can look out and know that every man and woman is in a discipleship journey with someone, and that if someone comes into the church for the first time, that anyone they interact with would know how to start them on that journey.
Welcome to another Sermon for One. I have a special guest. All my guests are special. This one, again, is from the Friday call that I have with different Christian leaders. And today I have Joel Shuler. He is from the New Anglican Missionary Society, and he is our expert in discipleship. Every single every single day that we have a meeting on Fridays, if there's an opportunity to tie whatever the topic is to discipleship, or whenever we ask, okay, Joe, what's your opinion? And then everybody just goes and says discipleship. So this is going to be an interesting conversation. I love the topic, and I also know that Joe is an expert on it. In the past years, we almost got into a joint mission project in Madura, and but that didn't pan out. But it's just strengthened our friendship, and I love to have him in the podcast, and so that you guys can know a little bit more about NAM's discipleship, and also about Joe. So, Joe, welcome to the podcast. If you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Jonathan, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Yeah, I'm never good at introducing myself. I have a very varied background, but I've been working full-time for NAM's network for about 3-ish years, maybe 4 now, going on 4. Time flies, but it's something I've been involved with for over 30 years now. It's an organization that was started by my father, and we exist to help plant churches. Wherever God opens the door, we will try and help plant churches, which is why I wanted to try and get Indino to go to Madeira. Still have hope for that. The door's still open. We never know, but I don't come at this from a ministry background. I come at it more from a IT background. I spent most of my working career dealing with IT and technical stuff, and just one day decided that I was really not really getting much fulfillment out of that. And when I really thought about it, the thing that I always enjoyed most was with NAMS was the joy of being around people that are planting churches. The challenges, the excitement, the struggles, no matter what, it was always just so fun and uplifting to be around those people and working with those people. So to be able to be full-time and helping that now is just such a blessing. So
yeah, awesome. Church planting is extremely challenging. I mean, I've tried doing it, and it's hard. It takes a lot of hard work. Persistency is important. Sometimes you have to be a little bit hard-headed and really, stay the course. A lot of times. So, how many churches so far is NAMS currently involved with?
it's hard to say because we're a pretty diverse group. But I'll focus on the work that we're working on in America. That we have we basically set the vision of trying to start 5 churches in every state by 2040, and we have a group in Indiana that's working to do that. There's 2 potential churches that are being started there. We're working with a group in Arkansas, and we have one church that's kind of is up and running that we're helping, and another one that seems to be starting, and we're helping facilitate that as much as we can. And then we have several groups down in South Carolina that also are starting churches, exploring starting churches, or that we're coming beside to try and help that process. So we also have less defined work in some other states, but that's a lot of what we do. We often refer to how we do this as apostolic church, pioneering apostolic church planting. That when we talk about a church, we're not talking about taking 50, 60, 100 people from one church and planting a new church. We really are talking when a few people feel like, I feel there needs to be a church in my small town, and we try and help them build that. So, we're happy to see a church grow to be hundreds and hundreds of people. But what we are talking a much more pioneering type of church planting than is
Mhm.
normally when people hear that word. They think, oh, you're going to build this, you're going to get this congregation and have this building in a few years, and you'll have 150 people and 200 people and all that. And that's great, but that's not really where our calling has been, although we've helped
Mhm.
churches do that in the past. So, and we have worked globally. We have companions around the globe that are doing great work. And, obviously a church in Nepal looks very different than a church in America.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. And each have their specific difficulties.
yeah.
I know that one of the things that I've been seeing, because I'm involved in a lot of Western businesses and all, is that the United States, a couple of decades ago, was not seen as a field that needed attention for mission work, but lately it seems that is as good as a field as remote places from other remote places in the world. And it's important for it to have a more, what you call that, a bigger presence of Christian churches in North America. Was that something that you also saw with NAMS, or what happened?
Yeah, I mean, NAM started as the North American Missionary Society to
Mm-hmm.
help plant Anglican churches in North America, but it rapidly grew and started getting international attention as far as people like, "Oh, can you help us?" And so it became the new Anglican Missionary Society to more represent that a few years after it started. But a lot of the North American work kind of died for a while for
Mm-hmm.
various reasons, which I don't want to get into today.
Yeah.
The global work continued to expand. But recently, when we started having companions come to America, and they started looking around like, you guys need our help. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's only 4 countries in the world with more non-Christians than America.
Mm.
We actually are we're no longer a Christian country. As far
Mm-hmm.
as, if any, the numbers just, we can't sit there and say, yeah, you expect the average American to be a Christian anymore. And then even we could get into the description of, well, what is a Christian and
What
how
is
do
the
you know if
question?
someone's a Christian? We've had plenty of discussions about this on the Friday group and other groups that I've been in. But so yeah, it is a big mission field, and I think that as I've looked at it and tried to understand the trouble and the challenge, as you probably know, I'll say, I think it comes actually down to discipleship. That I think we have
Mm-hmm.
lost the biblical understanding of what Jesus says is discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's really, there's a lot of reasons for it. I can't say that it's absolutely true. I have theories or ideas, but I think we've created a culture of Christianity in America that doesn't understand discipleship. They'll say they do, but I can usually challenge them pretty quickly, and sometimes get blank stares, sometimes get kicked out the door. But I think I can pull up some specific examples where Jesus talks about discipleship, and ask if people are doing this, and the answer is usually silence. I hate to say it, but it's pretty easy to go to any church leader and ask who they are specifically discipling on a weekly basis, and ask them to name people. They can't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so,
Yeah, and it's that culture, the fast-paced culture that we're in right now, and we've been in ever since technology has advanced very very fastly, very very, very rapidly. That we want results right away. We don't want to wait for the results. We don't want even if we say that what's the people tend to always ask when is going to be the next step, when is the next phase, and etc. And through discipleship, I think, is like a lifelong relationship that you have with somebody, that you grow with them together. I'm not sure what you think, but you can't really say, okay, I'm going to disciple somebody for 6 months and then we're going to, that feels just like a regular program instead of
yeah,
an actual discipleship relationship with somebody. Is
yeah,
that?
absolutely. I think that we increasingly say that discipleship is biblical, it's relational, and it's replicable.
Mhm.
So if you can't reproduce it, if it can't be reproduced easy, you're creating a program. And unfortunately, we have a church is full of people who are very used to being given programs. They'll make it great teaching, great worship, great leadership from the front. But when it comes to, okay, we're going to disciple you, okay, we're going to put you through this program. And it's 32 weeks, and you're going to read this, and you're going to know this, and you're going to need to know 27 points that you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that. And then we're going to read this book. And then you still don't have enough knowledge, so we're going to do this program. And maybe this program will allow us just to disciple. Um, and it's not it's not what I see when I look at what Jesus did. And I think you mentioned technology and how technology is breaking down a lot of our ability to do some of the things that are normal. I actually would go back further than that, and I think that it's I love cars, but I honestly think that the mobility that cars gave America in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and the loss of community, true community, is actually where the problem really started. Because if you're in a church where everyone drives 30 minutes to get there from different places, and when you go back to your neighborhood, no one in your neighborhood is in any way a part of your life as a Christian, then you don't have real community. If you're not encountering people on a weekly basis who can challenge you, and that's one of the great things about that Friday call now is, some of us have been in that call for what, 5 years? More? Some of the guys have known each other for a lot longer than that, but we know we can challenge each other, and we know we can bring people and discuss stuff, and that's technology allows us to do that throughout the world, which is great. But, if I see someone every day and I'm in a discipleship journey with them, that's gonna be radically different than if I go meet them once a week and don't see them any other time of the week. So I think that the biggest challenge we have in America is the lack of that close community. It used to be family. My dad grew up in a small town where, he couldn't walk a block without someone he was related to seeing him and saying, "Hey, John, you shouldn't be doing that." Now we don't have that. So I think that that's the big challenge. But also just the understanding of the word discipleship. And you talked about, I don't know exactly how you phrased it, but it's like, how do you know when you've made a disciple?
Mhm.
And I would argue if you can't answer that, you don't understand discipleship.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome. Before we actually spend a couple of hours on discipleship, um, so the name of the podcast is a sermon for one. So most of the most of the most effective sermons that I gave were the sermons where I had a verse, a passage, or story that I was sort of preaching to myself, the audience of one, and I had to go through it and really talk to it as if I was talking to myself before I talk to other people. Do you have your sermon for one today, Joel, that you could share with us?
yeah, I will. For the last, I don't know, maybe month or so, I've been on this discipleship journey for a long time. I was a slow learner. I was a preacher's kid. I went through decades of no one ever talking to me about faith because I was a preacher's kid, so I knew everything, which really means I knew nothing. But gradually, I started to be discipled by a wise discipler, and it took me a long time before I started to understand how to actually live it and apply it. But as I've done this more and more, it gets easier and easier and easier. But the verse that's really been in my mind that keeps weighing on me and I keep getting more out of it the more I look at it on one level is actually Matthew 4:19, and it's usually how when I'm walking someone through what we call the foundation of discipleship, it's usually where we start the actual conversation, and it's where Jesus says, and he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." I've been using that verse, to challenge men to understand why they need to be disciple makers and say, you can go and ask most Christian men, say, do you feel like you're a fisher of men? I don't know about you, but my experience has been kind of a
Mm,
no.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? It's like, well, are you catching people around you that are coming to you and that you are interacting with? Or do you feel like people are coming to you, that you're catching people and you are sharing the gospel, you're sharing your Christian life with them? And almost unanimously, the men I do ask that are like, no. But this is where Jesus started his ministry. And this is where Jesus started discipling these men. And so I think it's very important that we start there. But I also think it's important we pay attention to when Jesus says, and I will make you. Not you're going to do this, you're going to be great at this, you're going to have it all figured
Hmm.
out. Like, if you follow me, I will make you fishers of men. And I think that starts that conversation of, well, what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it really mean to be a disciple of Jesus? We'll care a lot. I'm going to try not to talk too long without letting you a
It's
chance
okay.
to
It's
interject.
okay.
But that
Yeah.
verse increasingly is one that just, the more I say it, the more I think about it. Come follow me. Okay, we must follow him. What does that truly mean? If we're doing that, he's saying he will make us fishers of men. So if we're not seeing our life and seeing the fruit of that, of catching men, then we need to go back and say, well, am I following him properly the way he
Yeah.
wants?
I think that's extremely a true statement because um, I deal with a lot of organizations at the high level of leadership that deal with like the executive directors of this, like the president of this, or and and one of the things that I've been seeing as a common denominator of the problems that they're having is that a lot of people that are supposed to be leaders in the Christian community, they tend to no longer you can no longer look at them and see that they are 100% following Christ and not following their own desires or needs or aspirations. And and once they start doing that, I noticed that the mission part of the church or the organization gets lost,
Yeah, yeah,
and it becomes something that is just for the people that are members of it, and just becomes part of, we need to take care of ourselves, and we are no longer uh, being fishers of men, getting more people in, but it comes to a point where they start cannibalizing themselves. Like there's nowhere else to get new nutrients or new for growth, and it's just us and us, and then there's splits that happen, and then the church just gets smaller and smaller, and then
yeah.
becomes very difficult.
Yeah, I know that there is a huge struggle for church leaders to disciple.
Hmm.
Because the model that we've created is one that the church leader has all this knowledge and they impart
Hmm.
the knowledge to us. And when they try and enter into these kind of relationships that I'm sure we'll talk about a lot more as we go in, it's very easy for them to fall into that pattern. I have the knowledge, these people are learning from me. Whereas a discipleship journey for us, now obviously for Jesus, it was different, but for us, it should be a very much more equal thing. As I understand it, and I haven't seen anywhere that this isn't true, Jesus never sent the disciples out by themselves. He always sent them out in twos, even to go get a donkey. I don't
Hmm.
trust one of you to get the donkey. I want two of you to go get the donkey.
Hmm.
And I think that's a sign that he's saying that you don't do this alone. If there's
Hmm.
not someone who is sharing that journey with you, it's going to be much easier for you to fall, to be tempted, to fall off, to do things that you shouldn't. And I think that that's part of the loss of community we have. We've lost that ability to be in people's lives in that way, and we've lost that willingness to push into that life. I've kind of gravitated towards, from calling myself a Christian to calling myself a follower of Jesus to call myself a disciple of Jesus, because the word
De- def-
Christian in
define
America.
let's start with defining. I think we're how would you define a disciple? I think if we start there, I think it would be easier for us to understand what your view is.
Well, what I would say is I don't want to use my words. I want to
Okay.
use Jesus's words. The word disciple or discipleship, I believe, is used about 270 times in the New Testament.
Mhm.
But there are 12 verses, 9 times, that Jesus uses the word my disciples.
Mhm.
So disciple is used as a descriptor of anyone who was around him, following him in any fashion. But we know reading the scripture that many of those disciples left and they wandered
Mhm.
off and they fell away. Whereas the core disciples, the ones that when he's really saying, you 12, you guys are my disciples. And we look at how he uses that word, he uses that phrase, my disciples. We come up with there's 5 things, that I think are signs of a disciple. There's we they abide in his word, they love one another, they bear fruit, um, they know the cost of discipleship, they're willing to pay the cost of discipleship, and they're in community. And whether we delve into all of those in real specifics or not, but so that's a disciple in my mind. Now, you could say, well, how do you know someone's abiding in God's word? Well, you meet with them weekly and you ask them, well, how have you been in your abiding time? And if they give you no crickets, just silence, you're like, well, why aren't you reading? Oh, well, I've been busy. Okay, Jesus says, if you abide in my words, you are truly my disciple.
Mhm.
So I would imply from that, he's saying, if you don't abide in my words, you're not truly my disciple. Which would you rather be, his disciple or not his disciple? And each of
Mhm.
those verses kind of build on that in different ways. So that's why I think it's important to say that this is what Jesus says about his disciples. And it's
Mhm.
challenging. We all know the verses very well, but it's really challenging with the men that I've gone through this with, mostly men. But when men go through this and they think about those verses in a very different way than what they've always heard them, and they start to understand that discipleship is action. Discipleship is, there it's not a descriptor. There's action. And
Mhm.
I'll bring it back to a conversation I had with AI probably about a year ago, so I'm sure AI is smarter now. But I was trying to prepare for one of these journeys and thinking about it's like, um, because one of the pushbacks often get in Christian circles is like, you know, well, I don't know if I've made a disciple. That's for God to know.
Mhm.
And it didn't sit with me. I'm like, no, I mean, because, Matthew 28:18-20 clearly says, go and make disciples. While you're going, make disciples. And so I asked ChatGPT, how would I know if you've made a disciple? And it gave this wishy-washy answer that was so similar to the Christian answer. Well, you're not necessarily going to know. That's kind of for God. And as long as you're just showing a good example of what it means to be a Christian, that's all you can kind of do. And I was like, I don't know why I thought this, but I was like, and I said this to the chat GPT, I said, if I asked you to make a cake and you took all the ingredients and put them in the pan, mixed them up, put the pan in the oven and never turned on the oven, have you made a cake? And AI goes, you make a good point. You'd have to be able to know when it's been made. And shockingly, it actually started to list a couple of the verses that we use as critical to understanding Jesus, when Jesus talks about his disciples. Which, and this, I hope this doesn't get me into too much trouble. I've yet to see a book
Mhm.
on discipleship that has those 12 places, those 12 verses in it.
Mhm.
Many of them may have one or two of those 12 places where Jesus talks about his disciples. And those are books on discipleship. And I think what I'd say, and again, hope I don't get into trouble with this, is most of those books are how to be a good Christian in a church. um,
Yeah.
and
Well,
that's not enough for me anymore.
it's also difficult for I think one of the things that I struggled with before was, when am I ready to have a disciple? Right.
Yeah.
That was one of my struggles before, even as a pastor. It was because my understanding of discipleship was a more intimate relationship that you have with somebody, where you're accountable for a lot of the personal things with that person. So if you cannot be transparent with the person that you plan to disciple or has asked to be discipled, then then you can't expect them to be transparent with you. And then if there's no accountability between both of you, be that if it's about reading the Bible, about praying, or about even personal decisions that they make or relationship, then it's almost begs the question, what's the point of the whole thing?
Yeah.
But there was this young person that was, and this is my, I think, my one success story in discipleship that I have, just the one.
I
Uh,
think you're more
be-
than that maybe, but yeah.
but this was what was one that at the end of our journey together, because we went separate ways eventually, because he then had his own ministry and he just took off by his own. Um, what happened was that he acknowledged me as, he calls me sensei until this day, and he's older than me, and I call him boss. I call most of my good friends boss, so I know I called you boss several times, so you're a friend. But um, that relation started because all of a sudden he was thinking, I might want to go to missions. So he approached my dad, who was a missionary as well. And my dad was in Indonesia, so he couldn't do anything. So he said, "No, my son is in your city. Why don't you talk to him?" So I said, "Okay, if you want to be a missionary, first thing we have to check what your biblical knowledge is. So why don't we sit down every week or twice a week, and we go through the Bible together and do that." So, and that's how it started. We started going through the Bible together, and we started talking to each other about our lives and etc. And that journey became. And then he said, "Okay, I think I'm ready to go to Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, because that was the fields that were open with our mission." And I said, "I'll go with you for three to 6 months." And then we spent like 6 months every day going through the Bible, talking about practical decisions that I would make if I was in this position. And that kept on for a couple of years. And he has just become an ordained pastor, I think 2 years ago. Has a family. He started a church, local church here, and became a missionary on his own. And we still talk from time to time. He has some questions. I also talk to him. It's more of a equal relationship at the moment in terms of how we talk to each other. He always asks me, "What's your opinion for this?" And then I tell him, "What is your opinion about this? Because I'm interested to know what you want to say." And I but it's rare to get that confirmation that a discipleship relationship has happened without it becoming a program.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of points that I could jump back, and I want to jump back to
Mhm,
slightly one thing. You did say about how do you know when you've made a disciple, or you have a disciple? And I think one thing I left out that I think is very important is until you see that disciple discipling someone,
mhm,
he's not been made. He's in the process.
mhm,
And it often is a very, we used to say it's an intentional process, but
mhm,
increasingly when we talk about it, it's actually, we actually think it needs to be, at some point it needs to become an explicitly intentional process, because I can be very intentional in thinking I'm discipling you, but if I never tell you that, if I never tell you this is the goal, this is what we're trying to do, this is why we're doing this, then
mhm,
it can it can wander very with no real destination in place. But if I'm explicit, say I'm trying to help you understand how to be a disciple of Jesus. And the fruit of that will be when you are discipling someone to help them become a disciple of Jesus. And it's a
mhm,
journey we're on. And I agree that every person that I've been on this journey with of discipleship, I'm going to be a friend of theirs for life. And
mhm,
they will always be able to call, or I'll always be able to call them and continue that process. Um, but you ask how soon before someone can be ready. And I think if you look at the story, the account of Jesus' first five disciples, and I'm going to say the first five, not the first five he called to be his disciples, but the first five, as I understand it, only one or two of them were called by Jesus. Two of them were with John the Baptist, and John the Baptist go, "Oh, you need to go look at this guy. This guy's
mhm,
got the answers." And they go, and then one of them goes and grabs his brother and says, "You need to
mhm,
come. This is the Messiah." And then that pattern is very early on. And what I would argue is someone can start someone else on the path of discipleship from day one. Now, That doesn't mean you just let someone go and do this day one if they have no knowledge, they don't understand what it means. But any of us could immediately say, look, I've been meeting with this guy Jonathan, and he's really changing my life through what we're talking about. You want to come join us? That's an act of discipleship. It's
Mhm.
not the end product, and it's only one piece of it. But there's no reason why, if you're in a discipleship journey with someone, that person you're in a journey with could say, "Look, hey, I got a friend I want to invite. Absolutely, come bring him. He's not a believer. Doesn't matter,
Mhm.
or whatever." Because it should be that relational, and that's why it's important to not make it a program.
Mhm.
Because if I'm discipling someone and we're 12 weeks into reading Romans and someone wants to come join us, what are we going to do? Are we going to go back and start over? Are we going to make him catch up? Or is he going to feel comfortable?
Mhm.
Especially if he has no knowledge of the Bible, is he going to be comfortable studying Romans? I don't know, maybe.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think that it's a pushback I have a lot on these groups and the people who do it. Like, okay, we've talked about your understanding of the foundation of discipleship. Now what do we do? We keep meeting, we keep talking. Well, what are we going to study? Nothing. Because if you have that pattern of knowing that when you come together, we usually pray, one of us will pray, and then we say, what's going on? What's going on with your life? And almost always something spiritual will come up. But a way to really make it even more obvious is well, what's God been saying in your quiet time to you this week?
Mhm.
Um, what can we be praying for you? And who in your life are you sharing this with? Those three questions in an environment are very easy to be used to prompt that if necessary. But from my experience, and our Friday calls, sometimes we talk
Mhm.
about nothing.
Mhm.
But often towards the end, someone will bring something up, and there'll be a deep, meaningful conversation that will go back to Scripture and our experience and our help to try and understand. And I think for me, that's very important. That Scripture is where we look for the answers.
So do you think that that Friday call that we have, just so people understand, is that we randomly get into that call. I know both of us got a notification as who's hosting the call just a few minutes ago. So, do you see that model of having different people come into the? We don't necessarily have a leader on that group in terms of we
We are
have a leader who
facilitators.
hosts. We have somebody who hosts it, but they're not necessarily the leader. But we come, we talk about football, depending on who comes first. We
We
start
talk
talking
about
about
memes.
talk about memes. I'm the meme guy of the group, so we talk about different stuff, and then all of a sudden we talk about something personal that's going in our lives. Sometimes somebody has a theological question, and different people give their opinions. Do you view that group as a in relation to discipleship? How do you view that in that
Well,
setup?
I've long desired for that group to really think of itself as a discipleship group. Um, but I've long ago gave up the idea of pushing that because the group is what it is, and it's a wonderful group, and it means the world to me. I hate missing it. I hate missing it, and I look forward to when I get to go down to North Carolina to go be with the North Carolina, and hopefully meet everyone in person at some point. But yeah, I think in almost all ways, it is exactly what I see discipleship being. Now, just to be clear, it's not enough just to get together and talk and do some of this stuff. If we're not doing the foundational bits of the discipleship journey, if we're not doing all those things, then it's not really truly discipleship, in my mind. But I don't want to try and force it. But I've learned from it that when I start groups like that, I'm much more explicitly intentional about what the goal is. The goal is for you to become a disciple maker. Well, I don't know how to do that. Well, I think I can help you walk you through the foundation of it, and then you and Jesus will work it out. So yeah, I think that the model of what we do, what the two things we don't do that I would recommend if we wanted to make it a little more spiritual is someone pray at the beginning and someone pray at the end. That someone pray, God, come join us on this call. speak to us, guide us as you want to, and then someone pray at the end. And the groups that where I'm facilitating it much more explicitly intentional about it, that's very important. That someone prays at the beginning, someone prays at the end, and we invite Jesus into. But we also have that goal of our goal is to become disciple makers, uh, and that's challenging for people because I mean I don't know about you, but I went 52 years of my Christian life. I mean, I pretty much grew up in a church. I've been a Christian my whole life, even though I accepted Christ when I was 13. But in all reality, God was always in my life. um, I went 52 years before I got to disciple someone. And interestingly enough, after a couple starts and failures, he called me yesterday and it's like, "Hey, I got two guys I'm going to walk through the discipleship journey with me." And he knows what to do. He just hasn't had the fruit yet. But he knows that it's a process, and he thinks these two guys are the guys God's brought to him. And we ran through a couple of things. He's got my little notes that I give people who want them that kind of really help outline some of this. But assuming 7-8 weeks from now, if he's walked them through that and they really get it and they really start thinking about people in their life that they might be able to do this to, then he's on that path, and he'll start to see that joy when he sees someone that he's done this do it. Now, I'm on a call with a couple that's been in hiding for many years because of sharing the faith in a country where they probably, they got in trouble for it. But I'm discipling him and his wife. And, he's the guy I've interacted with. I think he's a natural discipler. He does all of this without realizing what he's doing, which sometimes you'll run into. But having a framework to shape it a little bit better means it's easier for someone who's natural at it to pass it on to someone who's not natural at it. I'm not a natural discipler, whether it may not seem like that, but it's not come naturally to me. But his wife, almost like from week 2 was like, I can do this. We haven't even finished, and she's already thinking about who she could invite. And about 5 weeks into it, she's like, "Yeah, I've asked 5 people to join me on a discipleship journey, and 3 of them said no, but 2 said yes."
Mhm.
And I think one of them is not even a Christian. So she's much bolder than most of the men I've known.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but
And it's funny in mission work, women are they are when we started planting churches, it's always my wife's contact that works
yeah,
first. It's like she's going to the same store. We had a church that we helped start with 3 members, and then we were able to get to 200 kids, 70 adults, and most of those were my wife's contact. Just going to the store. Okay, and then my wife said, "Okay, I think this store, the clerk is very friendly. I'm going to go to that same store every day."
yes.
She would not even buy her grocery, the things that she needed, like all at once, so that she could make several trips to that same store. And then they became friends, and then she, "Hey, we'll come to church," and and that's sort of how it became. And then "Oh, you have family here, yeah, on the other house," and then she would go there. Yeah, women are a different breed. Men seem to think too much at times. Do you think that's the
Yeah,
something you
men.
notice?
I was joking today at the group this morning I was with, and I was joking that I'd heard it said once. I don't know who said it or why, what, but basically, real conversation can't happen unless a woman's involved. Um, and it's not true, but it is true. Men get together and we talk about nonsense. We talk
Mhm,
about things. We don't talk about us. We don't talk about our
mhm,
failings, our struggles easily. And I think that's cultural, and I don't think it's healthy. But we are wired the way we are, or to some degree. But yeah, get a group of women together, and they're going to talk about deep, meaningful things.
mhm, mhm.
And a
Yeah.
man, and I think that one of the things I want to kind of back up on is that um, with discipleship is, as a disciple of Jesus, if we're married, the most important discipleship relationship we can be in is with our wife. If you have kids, my dad said this because he experienced this. My dad was a preacher, and this was hard on him when he realized it. A few, 5, 6, 7 years ago, he says he realized that because he was busy leading a big church, so he was never He was always whoever was in front of him was the priority. And so, the kids, we weren't the priority. And he said, and it's absolutely true, if you don't disciple your children, culture will. And so as a father, as a mother, being active in the discipleship of your children and not leaving it to others to do, you be active in discipling your children is absolutely critical. So, if you're coming at this new and so I don't know how to disciple someone, if you're in a family, if you're married and you have kids, you have a very place where you can disciple someone every single day, every minute with them is a part of that journey. And that's very unique. And if you don't have that, it's much harder. But the other thing I would say is I think God has been showing that right now there's an incredibly ripe field of men and women who need to be discipled, and people in the pews sitting next to us. If you next time you're at church, and you know someone there, or you ask them, "Who are you explicitly and intentionally discipling?" You're going to get I have no idea what you're talking about. That is not good. The reality is I want to be in a church where I can look out and know that every man and woman is in a discipleship journey with someone, and that if someone comes into the church for the first time, that anyone they interact with would know how to start them on that journey, or know someone that might be better positioned to help them with that journey or whatever. But that's a goal, and I think that we have a lot of passive Christians who go to church and receive, and don't think that it's their job to bear fruit. And we can have a lot. I'm seeing more and more places in the New Testament, and as I think about it, where Jesus is talking about trees and fruit and branches and all that, and it's a theme that I think we have to be, we have to accept that we, as a follower of Jesus, if we say we're a follower of Jesus and believe that Matthew 20:18-20 is the call to all Christians, all followers, to make disciples, if we can't say in our life that we're making disciples, I'm not saying we're perfect at it. I have plenty of journeys that have started that have gone nowhere, that just fell apart, didn't work. But I have some that are bearing fruit, and it's not because of me. Jesus is doing it. I'm just a tool on the journey with.
It's I got really frustrated with a program that we had in several churches where evangelism programs. So I'm involved with evangelism explosion. So I'm like certified with youth, kids, EE kids, and EE youth, and I love teaching people how to sort of at least try to break the ice or create opportunities to evangelize. So I was super happy at first when I found out that several churches were going to parks and they had active evangelism programs. And then but then I started going to that church, and then I found out that you guys do this the youth come back with stories of success. They're happy, they're crying, and all of that. But the church is not growing.
Yeah.
So I asked them, okay, so after you evangelize somebody and then you're able to sort of have that confession of faith, initial confession of faith, what happens then? Oh no, we just pray for them, give them the address of the church, and we go. I say, this is almost like you leaving a baby right after it's born.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, what are you? Don't you have follow ups? Don't you have like Bible studies? Don't you build a relationship with that person because you are a pivotal part of that person's core relationship with God, like the very beginning start of the relationship with God. So what's happening? And there's a lot of Christians and churches, organizations that this just is not part of their radar anymore in terms of this is a life that was,
Yeah.
it's a life that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah,
Um,
you're bringing up a lot of points that I agree with, and I think really spending time reading Matthew 20:18-20 is important because it doesn't say go and evangelize the world. It says make disciples, baptize them,
mhm,
and we've confused evangelism and discipleship. And evangelism is a part of discipleship. It's a part of being
mhm.
Jesus. But if we make it the primary thing, and we get all excited when someone gives their life to Jesus, and we never see them again,
Mhm.
If you think about the parable of the sower, which one of the 4 are they gonna be? Are they the ones that just didn't really receive it, but maybe said they did? Or they received it and, it's immediately taken away from them? Or they become enshrined and, consumed by the thorns? Or are they the final one that bears fruit? If we're not in their life, we have no way of knowing, and
Mhm.
we can say, I'm not responsible for that. That's up for Jesus." But I think Jesus, we put too much burden sometimes on the idea that we have to be evangelists. Jesus says in one of the times where he talks about his disciples that if we do one thing, the world will know that we're his disciples. Now, one of the ways I'll go to that scripture in just a second, but one of the things I say is if we are really good at being Christian behind closed doors, we are never going to be a witness to the world.
Mhm.
So I always try and make my discipleship groups meet in public, coffee
Mhm.
shops. We meet regularly. People start to notice you. You start to interact with the people like, your wife was talking about. You start to know the people who are serving you, and they start to see something different about you. So the verse is John 13:34-35, where he says, "A new commandment I give you. You are to love one another as I loved you. By this, the world will know that you are my disciples." So if
Yeah.
we are good at loving one another as Christians, because this isn't saying love the world the way that everyone's like, oh, you got to love everyone. No, this is saying if you love one another, if you're my disciples and you love one another as I love you, I'm willing to wash your feet. I'm willing to die for you. I'm willing to give you 3 years of my life. I'm willing to share everything with you. If we do a good job of doing that, the world will know we're different. They will know we're his, and they'll be drawn to us without us having to be the one feeling like we have to do all of this. So that's my take on it. Now, they are gifted evangelists, and I love them. I'm not one of them,
Mhm.
but but
Mhm.
but but that's a gift, and that is a call that some people have. But it's not a call that everyone has in that same way.
Mhm.
But I think that's why it's important uh, to really make sure that we don't do this in a way that we're not seen by the people of the world.
Yeah. We used to have evangelistic crusades that we did when I was still in Bible school, where we would go to a remote location and then we would play the Passion of Christ, and and make people squirm before we actually do the sermon and do the calling. And one thing that I always told my students when I was teaching at the Bible school as well is that we have to prepare local people, or people that after the calling comes, it's not us pastors from outside that comes and sort of does the follow up. It has to be local people, people that are almost at the same age. So if there's an old person that comes forward during the calling, it has to be somebody at around their age. If it's a younger person, they have to have somebody that they can relate to and sort of share this moment so that it sort of connects and they can move forward. But going back to your one commandment, to love one another, and even if you say that it's not loving everybody in the world, even loving your neighbor, like the person that lives right next to you,
Yep.
or the person that's a tall order
Mhm.
nowadays.
Yeah.
It's a tall order. And it's funny because it's a tall order, even though our generation loves McDonald's, he loves something, and the word loves is attributed to things. I love my iPhone, I love my pencil, I love my hair. But to love another person is it has become such a tall order, and because we're so difficult in loving one another nowadays, there's a lot of times that I even question if certain people that are in ministry, that if they understand what loving God means.
Mhm.
Because and God does says that, right? If you can't love the person you see in front of you,
Yeah.
how can you say that you love God who you
Mhm.
cannot see? And um and that's one thing that I notice as well, when I look at ministry overall, is that there seems to be a lack of overall love. And I think that hampers a lot of the willingness to be somebody who disciples another person, because love is sort of is a core reactor to move you forward towards that
Yeah.
that action. Is
Yeah.
that correct? Or
Yeah, I actually think so, and what comes to mind, I'll go back to Matthew 18:28, 18 through 20 a lot, because we really do refer to it as the one mission, the one command,
Mhm,
the final command, because it does. I focus a lot on it. It says, "Go and make disciples," or while you're going, make disciples,
mhm,
baptizing them. But it also says, uh, teaching them to obey all that I taught you. And so when you think about that, okay, that one verse is saying a lot. Make disciples, baptize them, teach them to obey all that I've commanded you. And then he says, I'll be with you till the end of the earth, end of the age. But that obey bit, obey all that I.
mhm.
So in focusing on the scriptures that we do, we're not saying that the other ones aren't important. They all are important. But what we're saying is the foundation's here, and this scripture says everything's important. So if Jesus says love your neighbor, you love your neighbor. If
Mhm.
Jesus, all that stuff. If he says, go and evangelize, you go and evangelize. All that stuff's important. It
Yep.
absolutely is. But if we start picking certain parts of the Bible and say this is the important thing, it's important that I'm a teacher or a preacher or an
Mhm.
apostle or no, an apostle is not right, but an evangelist. If I'm an evangelist, that's what's important. Well, yes, maybe, and you may be called to be evangelist. But if you do that and miss out all this other stuff, are
Yeah.
you not going to be the person who comes to Jesus and says, Lord, Lord, we cast out demons in your name and we did miracles, and Jesus says, away from me, evildoers, I don't know you.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, in our uh, denomination or our church group, we go and focus a lot on the ministry of reconciliation that Paul talks about,
Yes.
reconciling the world unto Christ. And it's when we talked about love earlier, um, it actually fits a little bit very well with the ministry of reconciliation, because that is not just reconciliation between being dead in Christ and then being dead in your trespasses and now being alive in Christ, but it talks about even relational
Yes.
relationship, because you cannot reconcile with somebody and not have love and still have problems with them.
Okay.
I recently had to put that to the test. So I had there was this still a family member, but there was this guy who was really bad person towards me and my family for political reasons. Really bad. Guy really didn't like us, and he did a lot of things that uh, that made us sort of step away a little bit. We don't want to get involved. When you start, whenever you fight with whenever you fight with I'm not saying that he's a pig, but whenever you fight with a pig, you always get dirt in mud. You always roll in mud, right? So we will think, you know what? If he wants to mudsling, let him do it, and then we'll just step away. And it was very hurtful for us. There was a period of time that me and my wife and my family, we didn't want to get involved because he was going up in leadership. So recently there was a death in his family, and because he's still family, we sort of went to the wake. My wife, because she's the bravest of us all, she was the one who interacted with him. And then when he saw my wife, he went out of the church and was looking for something or somebody. And I'm sitting outside of the church just because I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't know what his view of me is being at the wake, right? So I said, let me just stay behind the scenes and allow him to sort of mourn. And he stepped out and he looked straight at me, but didn't. I thought, oh my God, he's probably looking for me, but he didn't say anything. My wife came out and said, he asked about where you were, and I said, oh, okay. He came out. He looked. He's bad. His eyesight is bad, and I'm in my heart. I felt God saying He was looking for you.
Yeah.
He just didn't see you. And I'm sitting down and saying, He's the one who did evil towards us, but I cannot assume that that was his step. And then I'm thinking about that verse of the ministry of reconciliation. am I going to be a hypocrite right now?
Mhm.
Right? Because up until that moment that I saw him looking for somebody or something, I thought that I was being respectful, paying my respects from a distance. And then I told my wife, well, I didn't tell her, but I said, "Oh my God, please talk through my wife right now." And I say, "Do you want me to talk to him?" And then my wife, in her wisdom, said, "It's entirely up to you, but I would be so happy if you did."
Yeah.
And I went there, and I went and I spoke to him. He looked at me, finally recognized me, shook my hand, asked about my health. And then in about 5, 10 seconds later, he started telling the story of how his wife passed away. And when you lose somebody, that recounting of events is sort of is therapeutic. It releases a lot of the burden that they're feeling because they can tell somebody what went wrong. I got a chair, pulled up a chair. We spoke about almost 45 minutes, and I'm there uh, tapping his back as he's breaking down sometimes as he's telling the story. And I felt the release
Yeah.
because I had forgiven him for a long time and I love him. But being able to reconcile and to actually put that loving one another into motion and have a mini discipleship moment between me and him
Yeah.
where we shared that experience. And I never asked him, but I hope that there was also a release of tension of either thinking, because I don't know if he hates me or he thinks that I hate him or something. But at that moment, it's something that dissolves whatever chains were there. So I had that experience very recently,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful when you can take something biblical that's in the Bible, that's a command in the Bible, and you can put it into practice, be that evangelism, discipleship, be that forgiveness, reconciliation, whatever. And I experienced the same thing when I was discipling the guy that I mentioned about, because every time that we would meet, every time that we would sit in our quiet time together, every time that we went to the mission field together, we went to Papua New Guinea. My mom could not recognize us as we came back because we went local. Like we had our hay sheds as well. Uh, Papua New Guineans, they don't take baths every day because it's so far away to get water. And me and this guy, when we were doing it, we would walk like 2 hours to get water so that we can take a bath and do the same thing every day. And the Papua New Guineans were, "You guys are crazy. What are you doing? Right? Why do you care how you smell?" And when we came home after a month, we 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 could not smell ourselves. But my mom said, I'm hosing you down when you come home." But yeah, it's a wonderful feeling to be um, doing. Uh, it's very difficult for us to find what the will of God is sometimes. But
Yeah.
when there's a command and we're able to fulfill that command, it's a beautiful thing.
I think you bring up,
Um,
it always comes back to discipleship for me. But
Discipleship.
one of the things you bring up is effectively John 8:31-32, where Jesus says, to those who believe, if you abide in my words, you are truly my disciples.
Mm,
So if we're not abiding in his words, we're not going to have those opportunities you talk about because we're not going to know his word. It's not
yep.
going to be ingrained in us. It's not going to be there for him just to prompt us and help us with that. And I think the story you told is a great one of reconciliation. And I wouldn't be surprised if you guys ever really do sit down and talk about what happened. It was probably something really small that got
Hmm.
left. And for one person, it became something they started just stress of it, and it became bigger. But ultimately, if it had been something that you'd been in a good relationship with in a way that was open enough that you said, "Yeah, you said this thing to me yesterday, and it really upset me." Oh well, I didn't.
Most problems are
Yeah.
small things. Most relationship problems are small things that you allow to fester.
Hmm.
And once it fester, it's smelly. And once it's smelly, you don't get close to anymore. And that gets addressed. And then imagination takes place because now he's imagining also, why did he step away? and then that just goes in a whole different direction. So discipleship. Now, discipleship is what do you think is for people that, okay, we've talked about discipleship, we talk about a lot bearing fruit, we talk about different examples, but what does make one a person ready to disciple another? How do you what if you were to put in simple terms,
Okay.
how would you do that?
Early on, usually, usually at the first week when we talk about, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Usually what I ask people to do is to say, I want you to go away and think about 5 names. Who are the 5 people that if Jesus would let you, you would want to disciple? Some people come back with 10. 5 Christians, 5 non-Christians, which is fine. But, we say 5. Who are the 5 people? One hand. Who are the 5 people that if you could, you would be on a discipleship journey with? And so immediately that gets them, and I ask them, do you have your list? Are you praying for them daily now? Are you looking for opportunities to interact with them? So for me, from day one, I want them to think about this is something that they're going to do to others. So when that happens and how that happens is going to be unique. You know, often those 5 names are not the 5 people that they end up discipling. I had a great story. One of the groups we were doing this with, my dad and I were co-leading a group doing this, and this was all remote. But one of the guys, he'd had a list of people he was praying for. But we jokingly talk about it as the Buddhist in the bush. Because he was a worship leader, and he often would bring people in to help him lead worship who weren't necessarily Christians, but they were musicians, because he's also a musician outside of them. He was walking down the road, and this guy pops up behind the bush. He's like, "Oh, so-and-so, he's a musician." And he's, "Oh, I was thinking about you the other day, and blah, 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 blah." And so they start to talk. And now this guy had been going through the discipleship journey with us. And this guy was a non-believer. He was a Buddhist. And we would have said he was a Buddhist. But so this guy immediately was treating this differently than he probably would have. He was like, maybe I should ask this guy, you want to get to coffee and start talking about this? Because the guy's like, oh, I really want to talk to you. And he told him the story that a week or so before, he'd had a dream. And the dream was basically something along the lines of, you need to go get a Bible. He's a Buddhist. And so he goes into Barnes and Nobles. He's standing in front of all the Bibles like, well, I don't know which one to get. And this guy walks up. It's like, what are you doing? I said, yeah, I just had this dream that I should get a Bible, but I don't know which one. He goes, well, I'm a pastor. Here, have this one, and gives it to him. And then, so he's telling that story, and it's like, yeah, I'm going to start meeting with this guy and start, obviously it's a different dynamic when the person's not a Christian and you're starting this journey. You may not be as explicit in what's going on, but what you do start to do is pour into their life. And if they're reading the Bible, say, so have you read the Bible? But the other thing that was interesting was one of the other guys in the group says, oh, that was so-and-so. We were at a coffee shop a couple weeks ago with my wife, and we bumped into him and we invited him over, and my wife prayed for him. So one person in the group prayed over this guy. A week later, he had a dream saying, go get a Bible. He meets a pastor, points out a Bible to him, and he bumps into a guy that now is starting to understand what discipleship journey looks like. Did any of them do that? No, God did that. So I think that the process can start really early. The challenge is you don't want to release someone who has no biblical understanding, who doesn't know how to pray, how to read the Bible, how to be accountable, all that kind of stuff. But in my experience, I've been dealing with mostly Christians in regards to this. So it's really easy for me to say to them, yeah, you can start this journey right away. As long as you have someone that you can go to when you don't know what the answer is.
When you have questions, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Make sure that you have someone, hopefully someone in your church, who you can go to say, hey, this guy asked me this question. I didn't know what to say. I said I'd try and find out and go back. And so as long as they understand that accountability and understand, not put that burden on, I have to give them the answer. If you don't know the answer, don't make it up. Just say, I'm not really sure, but I'll try and find out. And next week we can talk about that. So yeah, it's not, we have a companion in India and he tells the story of
Can you define companion before you talk about
yeah,
that story?
companions are just people that have aligned with NAMS. In the order, there's a process involved in that, but it's the
Mhm.
people that are really would say that they're part of NAMS and they're doing the work
Mhm.
of church planning and discipleship.
Okay,
Um,
got it.
but he's a uh, he's he's a really special guy in so many ways. But when he brings someone, he's working in remote India where Christianity is not at all present.
Mhm.
And he told us that he's got a 5-day plan for people when they, when they give their life to Christ. Uh, the next day he teaches them how to pray. Next day he teaches them how to read the scripture. Next day he gets them to share their testimony. Next day he gets them to do that somewhere. And then next day,
Mhm.
well, no, so yeah, the fourth day he gets them to share their testimony in front of people, and the fifth day he tells them now you're going to be persecuted for But he's taking someone from no belief to sharing their
Mhm.
belief and understanding the cost of that belief in 5 days. Now,
People might not understand why 5 days, and why people might not understand, because most of my audience are most likely from Christian countries, right?
yeah,
Where where but when you're from a place, for example, in Indonesia, when you have somebody that is from the Muslim faith and accepts Christ, there is there's a lot of things going on in their lives because it's a shock.
yeah,
It's a shock, and that shock also brings a lot of adrenaline, right, into it, and that's where it's great for you to capture all of that, and all of that, and the five steps that hit the four initial steps are really, steps in the ladder going towards sharing the gospel.
yeah, yeah,
And then, why does persecution exist? Obviously, Christ talks about that. But when you share the gospel, you get more rejections and people angry at you than you would get yes. And
yes.
preparing for that also is important. So for a lot of them, oh wait, this is going too fast. And I said, no, 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 no. There's a moment that needs to be captured there. And it's
And it
amazing that he has
yeah,
the five
and
steps. Yeah.
yeah, it is a challenge, and it's a cultural thing and one though, but he's also pouring into them over a 5-day period. So it's not
Hmm.
just come back next week, it's
Correct.
intense, but he's
Hmm.
pouring into them. And he talks a lot about one of his gifts is really paying attention to the chickens versus the eagles. And what he's always looking for, I know it's strange, what he's always looking for is the eagle, is the one that
Okay.
raises up above the others. And that one he pours into more and tries to see, is this a
Hmm.
leader who can help these chickens? It's an
Hmm.
analogy
Hmm.
on one level, but what
Okay.
he's very attuned to is not just I'm just focusing on this. It's like, okay, I'm going to go to this next town. I need someone that I can pour in a little bit more to, who can let those that when I come back 3 weeks from now, I can interact with him and see how he's doing and fix the things he's done wrong, if correct this and help him grow. And so he's constantly doing that. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what you see in with Paul's missions, that they'd go somewhere, they may be there a week, and they'd come back a couple months later, and there's a church.
Hmm.
How?
Hmm.
What scripture were they reading? They didn't have scripture in the way we
Hmm.
do. But the spontaneity of it existed. But there was also, as we see in the New Testament, a lot of correction that was necessary in a lot of these
Yep.
churches, because
Yep.
it wasn't like, okay, if you're going to start a church, you need to go to seminary and you're going to spend 5 years doing that, and then you're going to assist at this church, and then you're going to plant a church. In the New Testament, it was you walk into town, meet a few people, share the faith, they come to faith. It
Hmm.
was, we've made it complicated, and we've made
Yeah.
discipleship complicated. And I think that's why
Yeah.
we have all these books about discipleship and all these discipleship movements and all these people that use that word. Um, but
And discipleship is extremely important for succession planning,
yes,
in organizations and in churches, because you have to be constantly. I've partnered with a couple of leaders from different organizations, and some of these organizations have had problems in with leadership. And and if you look at the roster of the board of directors, or roster of people in power in those relationships, you see that it's just sort of a round robin of who is at the moment. It's always the same names for a couple of decades. And then I asked him, who is the I asked some of the people, from that generation group of people on the next generation, who do you see in your organization that sort of can replace some of these people? Because they won't live forever. People will start dying out very soon. And then from that next generation, what is next? Until it comes to my generation, like 40s. And even even at my age group, around 40s, it's hard for them to point somebody within my generation that they can confidently say in their organization that can say, okay, this person in 5 years or in the next 5 years, he would be ready to lead the organization. And then if you're having problems with the 40s, how much more are you having with 30s? Or are you even looking deeper and seeing if they had sort of a if we had a better discipleship program, we would not have okay, I'm calling it a program, but if you had a more
Or not.
discipleship culture, a discipleship culture, it wouldn't be so difficult for you to say, yeah, we have a couple of people talented in this area because I know them personally. I've been walking that journey with them, or I've heard about somebody walking the journey with this very interesting person that can sort of be part of this planning for this organization or this church or this group.
Yeah, it's important for try not to get as a church leader, who's the person who could replace you if something happened to you? Like if
Yeah,
something happened to you tomorrow, who would take over for you? And if it's
yeah,
like, well, there's no one in my congregation that can do that, what you're talking about is there's a problem there. And I think that too often we put too much burden on the leader of a church to do everything, whereas the
yeah,
biblical model is no, you have elders who take care of the people. If you're being called to preach and teach, you preach and teach.
yeah,
I often come across people talking about tent makers, as pastors, and they bring up the example of Paul being a tent maker. Well, three times. Three times.
hmm,
Three very specific reasons for it. And one of those times, if you read the next verse, it says, "And when his team arrived, he devoted himself fully to teaching and preaching."
hmm,
He was only doing it until the support came that he didn't have to.
yeah.
And to make that you need to be a tent maker. Well, that's not.
You're gonna get in trouble with your call
Yeah.
because, but I agree with you. I mean, I agree with you. Somebody from our call said that they don't think that the whole church, the whole church, the whole church setup is something that should be kept, and it should be more house and more relational and etc. And the model of a pastor that is reading the Bible, I think the term is reading the Bible and doesn't touch grass anymore, is not a it's not relevant anymore. I normally
It's a
push back.
challenge.
I push back a little bit, but I understand where some of these are coming from. And I just released a video about church hurt. There's a lot of people who are hurt by the church, regardless of what
Mhm.
denomination, are hurt by the church, like systematic decisions that the church make that that make us lose confidence in the whole infrastructure of things. But then I think that there's still a place for somebody like Paul, where he's really called to teach and preach
Mhm.
and to establish theological teachings. There's a place for that in the ministry. You can't have. I'm a person. I'm a tent maker.
Yeah.
Right.
I
I am a tent maker.
wasn't being critical of you.
No. I am a tent maker, but out of need,
Yeah.
not really out of. I don't love being a tent maker
Yeah.
because I would love to be able to devote my 100% time into planning and execution of planting churches, planting campus ministries,
Mm.
traveling here and doing that. As a tent maker, I'm able to balance my time right now because I'm a pastor as well, balance my time and do ministry, minister to the people that are within my company and do all of that. But it's still a divided attention
Mhm.
to certain things. I could, if I focus on my tent making, I can raise more money for the ministries that we do. but then I can't be as active there. And if I do the reverse, I can be super active and not eat for a couple of weeks because I'm not I'm working. So
Your family's not gonna be happy with you in that.
yeah, and that's a problem. I don't think I also don't think that tent making is definitely something that should be dep there are people that are extremely talented in doing tent making, and depending on the business that they're doing, depending on the job and how much it pays, it works
Yeah.
for certain people. But I don't think that should be the new norm for all pastors.
Yeah, let me jump in a little bit and say, we talked about raising up leaders, and Paul was very
Mhm.
good as far as we can tell. He always had someone with him who was becoming the next leader.
Mhm.
He didn't wander out and do this alone. He always had someone that he was raising up, someone that he was doing, and he had a team around him, the team that was supporting him. And it's a great model. It's not an easy one. I think that I hate to say it, but the Western missionary model has created a huge dependence that's not healthy. And I think what you're dealing with on one level is that as America exerted its power, and Europe to some degree exerted its power and exerted its wealth in this Christian work, a lot of people saw the leaders of the church as the one providing the support. Whereas
Mhm.
biblically, it's the people who survive
Mhm.
provide the support of the people who are called to preach and lead and do that kind of stuff. So I think we've very distorted that, and it's going to take a long time to fix that. It's even true in America. It's like people. I don't want to give to church, but God's calling me to give to the needy. Well, God's calling you to give to the church too. If you read the Bible,
Mhm. Mhm.
it is. We're to give a tenth. We can get an argument about the specifics of it, but it's very clear that we're to give generously to the needs of the church. But unfortunately, that's become very organizational, and the
Yeah.
fruit of those churches often is very minor, very small
Yeah.
compared to compared to what it
It's
could.
very small, and it's difficult because, for example, for us here in the Philippines, right? So if I were to, and this happened before because me and my wife, when we first got married, we were assigned to a church, and I just won't be in detail, but we were assigned to a church, and it's difficult because there is that concept that pastors have to suffer,
Yeah,
right? It's like you have to suffer for the ministry. So even though the congregation could make the life of the pastor a little bit more comfortable, no, 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 no. You have to be below minimum wage. Your house can't have more than one bedroom, and it's sort of that's another problem. But
it's a poverty
the
mindset. It's not
yeah
biblical.
yeah, and the problem is if we are not tent makers, we might not be able to achieve or get the things that we want for our family.
Yeah, right.
So, for example, if you have a group of people that are on the poor class, right, in the bottom, and if they all give offerings, 10%, 20%, or whatever the amount, if they give what they do and base out of love, and then they start giving love gifts to the pastor, if the pastor now has a higher income level than the average,
Mhm.
then it's viewed as there might be corruption there.
Yeah,
It might be because there might be greed. And now the kids' college, what if the pastor wants their sons or daughters to be doctors,
yeah.
right? And that becomes something that we now. I talked to a missionary, so I'm an international representative for our mission, and we were doing some of updates for 2026, and then I asked them, "What is a dream project that you have?" So if you had all the funding in the world, what is one personal thing that you'd love to have? And then they showed me, and they said, the husband said, I would love to finish my house. And and the wife from the other side of the room said, no, don't say that. Don't say that. It's okay. We should not ask money for our house. And then I asked them, can you show me your house? And their house has been unfinished for almost a decade. They
Yeah.
don't have the second floor. Whenever it rains, it pours down, and then for them to go to the second floor that doesn't have a roof, right, but just it's just a metal slab. They have to crawl to, and I'm saying, oh God, why haven't you told me about this? it's absolutely okay for you to raise money so that your house is livable by normal standards.
Yeah.
And there's that mindset that, that you can't. Yeah, I think it's so.
I
I don't know.
agree with you. This is one of the things with NAMS, to go back to NAMS, is we always try and work with Indigenous church planners. That
Mhm.
me coming to the Philippines to plant a church is ludicrous. I mean, if God
Mhm.
said do it, I'll do it. But it'd be crazy because the standard of living that I would expect would be such a burden. But and I know this doesn't work as well as it does in the
Mhm.
theoretical on the head. But if 10 families tithe, they could pay for the 11th to be full-time missionary, full-time ministry
Mhm.
at the same level they are. Now, the
Mhm.
problem is what you bring up. If that's 10 poor people, you're going to have a very poor minister, poor pastor.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that there is a poverty mindset that's been created unhealthily, which is, I live in one of the most expensive places in America, one of the really expensive state. This is where God's brought me. But it's easy to sit there and think about, well, I should be poor and I should live on a dime, but I can't pay the bills if I do. And so, we often ignore the wealthy to witness and minister to the poor, and the wealthy need it just as much. And so I think there's a balance in there. I had a story of one of the guys we worked with many, many long years ago, literally was uh, started a church in one of the most expensive postcodes in all of America to live. You know, he basically, because he started a Bible study at a church and it grew to 500 people. He didn't set out to start a church. He started a church,
Mhm.
but he couldn't afford to live in the town. And one of the parishioners bought him a house. Yeah, live here. Now that's biblical generosity,
Mhm. Mhm.
but that's not normality. But I think that to bring it back to discipleship, if we're in strong relationships, say with 10 men who are starting to really understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and we're not talking about giving the resources that God has given us back to Him, we're not doing the full job of teaching them to obey all that's done. But if they start to see that and learn that and start to live that that starts to have an impact, and that starts to
Yeah.
change a culture. And as that gets passed on, because that's what I think one of the things that's missing is and we know the reality. 20% of the people who go to the church give 80% of the money, and that's just normality. But I think it's a normality reflection of maybe of who's really understanding what it means to be a follower of Jesus versus those that are need some
I
help.
it's sad that that's normality. That when you mention normality is talking about the abnormal Christian behavior instead of what we're talking about what's normal in the world. But yeah, let me ask you this question. If yeah, if go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Uh, um, my question is, if you were to give, what would be your number one warning on discipleship that you would give people? Like, if this was the cliff ahead sign, you know, that when you look at, if you see this happening in your discipleship journey, you should be careful because you're either doing something wrong or you're going down a cliff in the next step.
There's the lighthearted comment, which I say, if you go down this path, it's going to change your life, because you're going to go much, much deeper than you probably ever have. And your life's going to change. And your life may look very different 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now. I think I think depending on who's asking that question,
Hmm.
I think I've mentioned it earlier that as a church leader or a church elder or deacon, you're going to have a harder time doing this because most people that you encounter are going to think that they have to know what you know before they can do what you're trying to get them to do. And so the danger is to go into those relationships with, I have the knowledge, I'm going to be doing the one that's doing the discipling. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, we try and lay the foundations of discipleship out, but the way I do that usually is as simple as reading that verse and then saying, "What do you think?" and
Hmm.
let them talk. Because if they can't start to internalize it, then whatever I say is not going to change them. They need to start saying, well, oh yeah, I never thought about, what it says there, that if I'm not doing this, I'm not his disciple, and then you start
Mhm.
the conversation. So I think that the danger is always that we think that because I've done it and I know how to do it, it's my job to teach it, as opposed to just my
Mhm.
job to show them. When Jesus called the first five disciples, when the first five disciples joined him, as it seems to be, he then went on a walk to another town that was probably a 5-day walk, 3-day walk away, three day walk, which means in 3 days he spent 72 hours with them. If you spend 1 hour a week with someone, it takes you a year and a half to spend as much time as Jesus spent with them in 3 days. So
Mhm.
that would be the other thing, is if you're going to go down this journey, you're going to have to sacrifice your time. And that's hard for a lot of people. You're going
Mhm.
to make time that if Jesus brings someone into your life and it makes you think, God, are you asking me to disciple him? That, okay, where am I going to find an hour of my life, at least an hour a week to spend with this man? Or,
Mhm.
that's, so it's a sacrifice, but it's a joy,
Mhm.
because it's friendship. It's deep, meaningful friendship that will last to eternity.
Mhm. I love what you said about, asking the question instead of sort of teaching them. You ask the question, because that's something that I used to do a lot when I used to teach. I used to teach senior high. I used to teach a Bible school, and whenever somebody asked me a theological question or, well, what do you think about this person, then I always put it back, and they hate it because I asked them, what do you, because it's different when you teach a group, in a group, right? There's like different points of view, and it says, so you basically give a frame of what your belief is, and you teach them and what you understand, and then ask questions later. But when you're doing a one-on-one or a very small group, uh, sort of Bible study or meditation, you it's important for you to go where they are at.
Yes.
And when they tell you what they believe or they understand about that verse, you understand where they're at, and you can actually go there and hold their hands and go through that learning journey together with them, instead of you say, okay guys, so this is the verse and points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is it. And they might not be even at the introduction of the verse. It could have been the very first time they read the verse.
Yeah.
And I love that method of asking people where they're at, so that you understand how you're going to approach and understand where the understanding, what level of understanding they are.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's why we start with the, come follow me. It's like, do you feel like you're a fisher of men?
mhm,
Do you want to be?
mhm,
Yes. Okay. The final command, Matthew 20:18-20, um, are you making disciples? No.
mhm,
Do you think that this verse is a call to all followers of Jesus, all Christians? If they say no, you're going to have trouble.
mhm.
If they say no, I don't think that applies to everyone. But if they say, yeah, I think that is a call for all Christians, then you can say, okay, it says to obey all that he's commanded.
Let me ask you this: um, Is it? Do you think that it's okay for somebody to? Um, I think your answer is going to be yes, but let me just check. Do you think that it's okay for somebody that is in that discipleship journey and is very good at it,
Hmm.
or is being successful at it, that they can eventually say or come to a point where, because as somebody who does this as well, it's very draining.
Yes.
It's very draining. And if I were to give that warning sign, would be for you to check your levels as well, right? Because it's very draining, and it can be draining if it's just you pouring and you're not getting something back from the person that you're discipling as well, because that has to be, that sort of has to refresh you. But
It's
there
probably
are times,
much more of a teacher student or
yeah, yeah,
mentality than a
yeah,
disciple journey.
and 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 I think that, but there are seasons, Joe, right, where the person that you're discipling, if they go through something very tough, like a
Mhm.
personal stuff, that sort of drains you a lot, because you have to, you have to be with them.
Mhm.
And that happened to me a couple of times where I'm in discipleship journey and then something terrible happened to somebody and then you have to be there with them. I normally use my wife, my other disciple partnership, and say, "Oh, please fill me with grace right now because I'm running dry." But I think that it's important for us to understand what our levels are and seek help
Yeah.
with the
Yes.
person that we are that's discipling us because it's always like that. There's somebody up the chain level that could pour into us,
Yeah,
and
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that I don't ever wanna not be in a disciple relationship with someone that I can go to and really get the discipleship that I need.
mhm,
I think it's dangerous for any of us as followers of Jesus to not have that in someone, whether it's our wife, whether it's our father or friend or our pastor. Like I said, I've said it several times. The calling of a pastor is different than the calling to make disciples.
mhm,
Where
mhm,
I think we're all called to make disciples. Not all of us are called to be pastors. And
mhm.
I know how lonely the pastor job can be. I know how hard it is. But I think that a pastor that has discipleship relationships in his life, not just I'm discipling my congregation, but
Mhm,
these are people outside of that or in an environment where I can trust them with anything I say to be safe if it needs to be, that I can bring them my failings and we can talk about it. Any of that stuff. If a pastor doesn't have that, um, it's dangerous. But it's also true that if a Christian doesn't have that, it's dangerous.
yeah.
So I think that a lot of people confuse the word discipleship, mentorship, coach, teacher. They're very different. I
Mhm.
like to say that a good coach doesn't have to be a good physical, like a football coach doesn't have to be good physically. He just has to be good at getting people who are physical to do what's necessary to win a game.
Yeah, look at American football, right?
Right. A
Mm,
coach is
yeah,
a coach
you
may
have
not even
pet
be able to
ball.
throw a football, but he's gonna coach the greatest quarterback of all time to do what's necessary. That's a very different relationship. He's also not coaching them to be a coach. He's teaching them to be a player.
Mhm,
You can mentor someone and never know you can be mentored by someone that you never meet. You read his books, you do this, do that, do that. You can learn from a mentor and never actually meet them. But also a mentor is not trying to turn you into him. A mentor is trying to help you become the best you that you can be. And a teacher, you know, a good teacher can teach something they don't even know.
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm,
and they may not even be able to put it in practice, but they're just imparting knowledge. But discipleship, being a disciple maker, is teaching someone to follow Jesus the way you're learning to follow Jesus. It's
mhm,
it's replicable. The goal is more use, not me personally, but more
mhm.
followers of Jesus who are disciple makers. That
Yeah,
that
and I think that though there are times that in the discipleship journey, you would have sort of that relationship for a small period of time, especially the beginning, like a teacher-student relationship. But in my experience is that eventually you come to a point where you both sort of
yeah,
become become equals in that relationship, and you are accountable to each other more fully compared to as somebody's a little bit younger or somebody's a little bit uh, new to the Christian faith, but
yes,
eventually you become this synergy that happens in that relationship. Whereas when it's a teacher coach relationship, you might never get to that point because he's always instructing, he's always teaching. But in discipleship, you as soon as you start, you can start learning from each other, right? As soon as you start, that can happen. Um,
most of the
in,
people I've discipled have a better understanding of the Bible than I do.
yeah,
I,
it does happen. Yeah, awesome, Joe. I think that we've talked a lot about discipleship. I would love to have this conversation again and talk about different aspects of it
Anytime.
in more detail. Um, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to tell my audience? So my audience is primarily in the Philippines. I have like 20% of them that are in the US, but around 80% is 70% Philippines. You have 10% Indonesia, where discipleship and openness culturally is not necessarily something that's easy to
Yeah.
to do. And so, do you have any final thoughts for us?
what I would say is if this has resonated with you, anyone who's listening, if this is like, I want to be on one of these journeys and you don't know where to start or how to do it, just pray that God will bring someone in your life that will disciple you. And then keep your eyes open to who comes into your life. And because I do think that I think if you open yourself up to say, God, if you bring someone in my life, I'll disciple them. But if you don't know how to do that, start by saying, God, I don't know how to do this, but I want to. Help me find someone who can disciple me. I don't know why God would not honor that, because, when let me jump back to we haven't really talked about the bearing fruit scripture,
Mhm.
where Jesus says it, but I think it's vital. It's so important to what we were just talking about here. It's John 15:7-8. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciple. I think this is a very circular thing here, because it's easy to read that and think, oh, well, if I'm really doing a good job, I can ask for anything and be given. But if what you read here, if you pay attention, it's like, well, what would be better than proving to Jesus that you're one of his disciples? Bearing fruit, okay. Well, what if I ask Jesus, help me bear fruit? And so I think what he's saying here is you can ask for anything. But if you want to prove to be my disciple, what you really should be asking for is, Lord, help me bear fruit. So I feel that if you say, Lord, I don't know how to disciple someone, help me find someone who will disciple me, it's fulfilling this path, because it just
Mhm.
seems to be very much what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to be disciples of him, and he wants us to be able to make disciples of him. And so I can't think of anything better to ask, and I can't think of many reasons why Jesus wouldn't respond to that. So
Mhm.
that's what I would say is
Awesome.
if you want to be on one of these journeys and you don't know where to start, pray that God will bring someone into your life who can disciple you, and reach out
Mhm.
to NAMS, reach out to Jonathan. He's got plenty
Absolutely.
of time. He could disciple 50, 60 people a week.
This is where the meme comes in. I'll flash a meme right now here.
I look
But
forward to
no, I absolutely thank you for that. I think that's one of the greatest advice ever, to keep your antennas up and alert to the people that come through our lives. And I know that that's absolutely true, because there's always a reason for us to look the other way. There's always a reason for us to find excuses not to see what's in front of us, and the people that need us uh, in front of us. So absolutely. Um, Thank you so much, Joel, for the
pleasure,
time.
Jonathan. Thanks.
We'll definitely discuss about rescheduling, doing another schedule.
We should just have a whole series. Just
Absolutely.
we'll do the discipleship journey on your podcast.
Absolutely. That would be great. That would be great.
All right.
Awesome, Joel. Thank you so much for the time, and enjoy.
Pleasure. Bye.